Welcome to Confessions of a Parent Coach. I'm Coach, mother of four, and potty talker, Ann Kaplan. This is the podcast where I confess something from my own parenting and coaching life, teach a lesson around it, and answer your questions. Even we parenting experts are far from perfect, and the real magic happens when we get down with all that imperfection. We get into the gritty side of parenting here, so earbud up and dive in. Welcome into another episode of the podcast, listeners. And if you're watching the video for today's episode, you are going to see that I am wedged between a wall and a hotel bed, surrounded by pillows, to be able to record this podcast episode, because I am actually in Eugene, Oregon, helping my second son go through his college orientation. And sometimes moms, we just got to be improvising. And so I am going to be recording this week's episode and next week's episode in my little pillow fort in this little hotel in Oregon. So there you go. And it's all for a great reason. And I'm super excited and happy for him. And it's going to be great. And this town is really cool. If anyone's interested in learning about Eugene, Oregon, it's super fun. What we're going to talk about today on the podcast is the core emotions that go along with the Enneagram. And if that sounds really boring and dry, trust me, it isn't. It's really profound and super important. So I really kind of call this episode like, what are you really feeling? Because whatever type you are, you've got this core emotion that's such a driver in how your personality was created, in the habits that you have, in the things that you can tolerate and the things that you have a hard time tolerating. Like, this piece of the puzzle is really, really profound. And I hope that you're going to see that as we keep going. So always starting with my confession, as you know, and my confession this week has to do with my core emotion. So I am an Enneagram type 1, which you all know if you've been listening to this podcast for any amount of time. And the type 1 is in the instinctive triad, sometimes called the body triad, the gut triad, whatever. But the core emotion for the gut triad, that instinctive triad, is anger. And actually, when I first learned about these core emotions and I was getting deeper into Enneagram work and going beyond just like, oh, what type are you? What type am I? But learning about the triads and all that stuff, the book that I was reading at the time, it didn't say anger as the core emotion. It said rage. And I remember having this like visceral reaction to it, which I simultaneously felt totally called out and exposed when I read that, but then also I had so much resistance to it. And that's my confession for you, is that my core emotion is rage. And for me personally, even just saying my core emotion is rage feels like a very naughty confession, because ones especially have like a ton of personality constructs around their anger. We are very angry people, but we also have a lot of self-judgment and criticism and resistance and attempt to control that anger, because at the same time that anger is such a huge piece of our personality, it's something that we have learned and taught ourselves to believe is bad. Anger is bad. Our society shows us that anger is bad. Anger itself is like it's a frustrating, unpleasant, negative emotion to experience. We all have this kind of idea, having an angry outburst, or even when we're parenting our kids and they start to throw an angry tantrum, like, we want to parent them in a way that helps them not to do that anymore. And so, just like anybody else, I grew up in a world where the goal is not to lose your shit, basically. Let's not all like have this angry, rageful way of being in the world. And on top of that, I personally, just luck of the draw, was born into a family that with two very angry, rageful parents. One of my parents is also in the instinctive triad, but is not a 1. They're an 8. And 8 is much more expressive with their anger than the other two, the 9 and the 1, which are also in that instinctive triad. So I experience what it feels like when people are angry all the time. Since the day I was born, I've been experiencing what anger feels like to receive from other people. And it was awful. It was excruciating. So I have all this anger inside of me. It's my natural proclivity as a 1 to try to control and manage and do the right thing with my anger, which is to not have it. In my mind, that's my rule. Then I'm also raised in a society that vilifies anger. And I was raised by extremely angry and I would say unhealthily angry, meaning they did not express their anger healthily anger. So I had like what would that be? Like a quadruple whammy, not a double whammy. I would say a quadruple or maybe quintuple whammy of layers around anger. And I have had so many tearful therapy sessions around this. Like I remember saying at one of my sessions with my therapist, like, why did it have to be anger? Like there's every other negative emotion in the world. Like I can handle it. I can feel it. Grief, loss, sadness, shame, fear, like anything, anything. I would beg to feel any other feeling than anger. And it just felt like this cruel joke that was being played on me, that my thing that I had to deal with for my entire life was anger. It just feels so unfair. Like I would beg to have sent anything else because I have so many rules and so much judgment about anger. And I don't have that about anything else. Not even to even like orders of magnitude close to the extreme that I do around anger. But I have come to learn that that's kind of the way it is with your core emotion. So the other two core emotions for the other two triads are fear and shame, which is also sometimes talked about as loss or sadness or lack, that kind of thing. So those are the three emotions of the three triads: anger, shame, and fear. And I would crush it dealing with shame or fear. I'm so good at dealing with those two things. And I was just like, what? Why can't I have one of those? Like, I'm really good at that, but that's just not how it works, right? And if you are listening to this and you know what your type is, you might be able to see which is your core emotion. So if you're in the heart triad, so that would be 2s, 3s, and 4s, your core emotion would be shame, sadness, loss, lack, that kind of deep, just feeling of like almost heartbreak and extreme quote unquote darkness. And if you're in the thinking triad, so that would be types 5, 6, and 7, your core emotion would be fear. And sometimes that looks like worry or anxiety, that kind of thing. So ask yourself, like, wouldn't you rather? Do you feel the same way that I do? Like, where it's like, gosh darn it, I really nail it with those other two emotions that aren't my core emotion. And my core emotion feels like unique torture to me. Well, of course that's the case, right? Like if it's your core emotion, then that what that means is so many things, but ultimately all of those things lead to this conclusion where it's like, this is your Leviathan. This is your albatross around your neck. This is your life's work. So, of course, it's going to be harder for you than those other two triadic emotions. So, I would definitely say, like, I feel like this is like a threefold confession for you this week. First, like I said, because I have so many rules and judgment around anger, just telling the world that my core emotion is anger feels like a confession to me. Then my second confession around that is like how resistant and almost in denial. And I almost like threw my own, like, just, I wouldn't say temper tantrum, but just almost just like extreme um what would I say, like extreme grief maybe around my realization that it was that my core emotion was anger. And the third part of this confession is what I'm going to tell you right now, which is how this affects my parenting. I remember early on in my marriage, Mike saying to me a few times, you're just a really angry person, or you just seem angry all the time. And I would be so triggered when he would say that, because I have all of that judgment about anger. I'm sitting here, when I get feedback from the world around me that I seem angry, I have two thoughts. One is like, if you don't even know how much work I'm putting into not expressing how angry I really am. So if you think this looks angry, you're just seeing the tip of the iceberg. But then the second thought I have is, fuck, my strategies aren't working. If people can tell I'm angry, like I'm letting the cat out of the bag, and I have all of these strategies to keep my anger in check, and they're not working, and I'm failing. And you can imagine that without doing my own personal work around all of this stuff that I've shared with you around anger, how that would look in my parenting and in my marriage. Like, I'm really angry, but you can't talk to me about how angry I am, because that'll just make me more angry. And and now, like, I have a partner who's afraid of me. My kids could be afraid of me because they can feel that sizzly intensity that's just beneath the surface that we're not allowed to talk about because it's too upsetting to me, but it's definitely there, and it's definitely affecting the way that I parent. And this is a terrible setup for my parenting. And thank God that I have done so much work around this, because I would venture to guess, and if one of my kids were here, I would ask them to confirm this or correct this. Um, I would imagine that if you were to ask my kids, especially my older kids that can communicate this more articulately, what they would probably say around my anger is that, oh yeah, mom's got some fire in her. She's definitely a spicy meatball, and I'm not afraid of her. And I can talk about it. And like, she's a great mom for all these other reasons, and she's self-aware and blah, 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 blah. That would not have been what anyone would have said about me 15, 20, even maybe 10 even years ago, because I wasn't self-aware, and I wasn't able to accept that this was part of who I was, and I wasn't able to receive feedback about it from the people around me because it was just so painful to me. So that's my confession for you. And like I said, I wonder if you kind of turn this around and ask for yourself, like, is it true for you too? If you do know your type, is your core emotion, does it feel like the one thing that is like at the heart of what you need to work on and what you can't seem to overcome? Whereas those other two emotions just seem like, okay, yeah, maybe not fun, but doable. That's how it feels to me. And then also ask yourself, if you do know your type, how that core emotion might be affecting your parenting, your relationships, and what raising your consciousness about it, reaching a place of non-attachment about it, doing some of this deep work that we talk about on the podcast about it might change all of that stuff. So that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today. So the first thing I want to talk about is just kind of like, why does this happen? Like, why do we have this core emotion, and why is it like such a, sticky wicket for all of us when we're trying to work on this stuff? Well, I'm not going to go into it too deeply around like how our personality constructs are created, but basically what we understand about psychology and about human development and all of that stuff is that, we're born, we have like a sense of self. Um, for some people, we call this like your true nature or your essential nature or your higher self. Or for some people, that you might even call that your soul. It's that idea of like who you are truly, truly, truly at your core, yourself. And most philosophies anymore would say that, and the Enneagram agrees with this, and all the other tools that I use in my coaching agree with this idea that like when we come into the world, we have that self. It's already with us. Even when you look at like psychology stuff like nature versus nurture, there's nature, right? Like it's just who you are when you were born. That sense of self, that self exists, and your sense of self is intact. But life is hard on the outside of a womb. Life on earth, it has discomfort, it has some rude awakenings. Like, even if you're parented by the most angelic, incredible humans on the planet, we all experience what's called in lots of different ways, but the words that I'm going to use for it is a separation trauma. It's just literally the kind of slap in the face that we experience when, life doesn't turn out the way we want. I mean, it could be something as banal and universal as being born and experiencing how uncomfortable it is to be cold and wet and slimy on the outside world. That's something you've never experienced anymore. And it can be a shock. It could literally be a separation trauma. You are separating from that sense of whole, one completeness of self into discomfort, shock, surprise, fear, anger, could be, all of those things. So we start with a sense of self. We experience separation trauma in whatever form that might be. It's that feeling of being separate from the world around you, separate from yourself. And then we have all of these mechanisms just waiting to be awoken in our brain, which is what we use to create our personality to cope with that sense of separation and protect us from future harm. These are all of your protective habits, your mannerisms, your beliefs about the world, the stories you tell yourself. In internal family systems, we would call all of your parts get turned on to keep you safe, protect you, hopefully make sure you never experience the hardship of whatever that separation trauma was, again, all of those things. And that's what your personality is made of. That's what your sort of like your ego is constructed from. And as we keep going on through that process of personality development, most of us go through a period where we're way over identified with our personality and way under connected to our true selves. And I like to say to my clients, like, this like process of identification with our personality really starts in, the pre-adolescence phase, like that 9-year change you may have heard me talk about on a previous podcast. So starting at that young age until, I don't know, like late 20s, mid 30s, we are just, I always say, like, we're kind of calcifying our personality. We're becoming more and more identified with our personality. Our personality structures are becoming more and more rigid. And then for a lot of people, especially a lot of my clients, they reach out to me around that age or later because for whatever reason, we sort of experience what maybe we could call even like an identity crisis, where we realize, like, okay, this rigid construction I have about who I am and how I have to be in the world and the way the world works, it's not working for me anymore. It's kind of like this house of cards that comes crashing down. And then if you choose to engage in it, we get to spend the rest of our lives kind of deconstructing that personality, becoming less identified with our personality and more connected, regaining that connection with self. So that's kind of like the arc of like how this personality stuff gets developed. Well, during that period of separation and personality development and then identification with our personality, we have this sort of core unbearable yet driving experience. That's that separation trauma that we wind up creating our protective habits around. That's our personality. And that winds up really being determined to a large degree by that first fundamental nature, by yourself. So, like, when we look at this through the lens of the Enneagram, whatever type you are, that is yourself. That's the type you were going to be before you ever came Earthside. Your parents didn't make you your type or anything like that. And because that's who you are, because I'm a 1, when I experienced those little separation traumas, or maybe even big separation traumas in certain cases, the way that I dealt with that was largely influenced by the fact that I was a 1. Another person could have experienced the same experiences that I had and react to them completely differently, come up with completely different personality constructs to deal with those things. Like, all of us have had the experience of being born into the world and experiencing the discomfort of being cold and wet and slimy out in the air. But not all of us have developed the same personality to deal with that shocking discomfort that we had when we were born. How we develop our personalities is so influenced by just those fundamental building blocks we had when we first came earthside, before anything in the world had influenced us yet at all. And then, of course, the environment we grow up with. There's nurture too. We've talked about that all also on the podcast. But so that's where those core emotions come from. It's not because of anything that happened to me that my core emotion wound up being anger. It's because I'm a one. That was definitely going to happen. So, okay, well, what does this all mean? Like, why would we even care about this? Well, I gave you a little bit of an example when I talked about my own personal experience of like having anger and not really being able to talk about it, confront it, accept it, communicate about it, receive feedback about it. I was a much lesser parent, a much lesser partner, a much lesser person. And so understanding this stuff is profound because it helps you understand how you perceive and interact with the world. So when someone gives me feedback now about like, man, you seem a little fired up about this thing, I can say like, yeah, that's probably exactly how I seem because that's who I am. And yes, I can feel that inside me and not deny it, not try to make it go away, not try to rationalize it. I just know that that's a part of me. I can hear that and I can be self aware in my interactions. You know, the other thing that's really interesting about the triads, which is another utility of this core emotion study, is there's so much there for us in looking at the Enneagram through the triads, not just the core emotion, but they go hand in hand. So for that instinctual triad where our core emotion is anger, what we're looking for, all three types in three different ways, self-reliance. That anger and self-reliance become this kind of like two sides of a coin in a weird way, or this like dual driving force inside of us. And for the heart's triad, that core emotion is like that shame or loss or sadness, and that goes hand in hand with this seeking or desire for either attention, a feeling of worthiness, a feeling of value. And those two things become this driving force for the types in that heart triad. And I hope that you can feel this as viscerally as I do when I think about my triad. If you're in the heart triad, can you sense that feeling, that inner maybe sense of like emptiness or sadness or loss or lack? And then a simultaneously or responsive drive to fill that empty piece with worthiness, value, attention from the world around you. You can see how those two things are kind of like partners in like creating your entire raison d'etre, your reason for being in this world. And then we look at the thinking triad. The core emotion there is fear. And that goes hand in hand with this deep, deep desire for stability and security. And those two things wind up becoming this driving force. And you can see that the desire is the antidote to the emotion, right? Like if my core emotion is fear, I'm really worried, I'm anxious about the world around me. Well, security and stability is going to be the antidote to that fear. I'm not going to feel afraid anymore. If I'm feeling super angry at the world around me, or that I need this, or at myself, in my case as a one, and I'm trying to just control and figure out everything around me, well, the antidote to my anger is control. When I feel like I'm in control, when I feel like I am self-reliant, not dependent on anybody else, I'm autonomous and independent, I'm not going to feel angry anymore. That's the antidote. And if I am feeling this like deep sense of loss and emptiness, like something's missing, a lack, well, of course, filling that up with a sense of value and worth and worthiness and getting that validation that that's what I have from the attention of others, that's going to be the antidote to that feeling of loss and emptiness. So, I mean, when you start to look at these core emotions, so much self-awareness can come in just in these moments in your everyday behavior, but then also in understanding like your entire humanity, your entire personality comes to make so much sense when you start looking at these things. So Let's talk about how this looks in terms of parenting, right? Because when we're experiencing that loss of connection, we are not connected to ourselves. Well, what that means is that we are basically parenting in a trance. We are unaware. We are sleeping. So there's a lot of self-help books out there. Like if you read oh gosh, there's so much philosophy and mental health writing about consciousness, and this idea that when we're not conscious, well, it's almost like we're in a dream state or we're sleeping, like we're not really present, we're not aware. You've heard all of these words, I'm sure, in the zeitgeist in all these different ways. Well, imagine being parented by somebody who is just not conscious. They've lost connection with themselves, and all you're experiencing from them is their personality constructs. Or in IFS language, we would say, I'm not actually interacting with yourself, I'm interacting with your parts, your avatar, your mask. That's all I have a relationship with as a child. And that creates or contributes to that child's now loss of connection. Because if they don't have a connection with you, the real you, capital Y you, capital S self of you, there's a missing connection there. And then we wind up calling that not just a separation trauma, like any other experience could be, because when we're talking about separation trauma, we're talking about a separation within the person between the separation of that connection with self. So it's a really internal thing, it's an individual thing. But when one of the things that's contributing to that loss of connection is the child's inability to have a connection with the true self of their parent, that specific kind of separation trauma is what we would call an attachment wound. The child and parent don't have a healthy attachment. So, I mean, oh my gosh, how does this affect our parenting? How does it not affect our parenting? Right? Like, holy cow. When I think about the fact that, like, okay, great. So if I don't figure out my reconnection to myself, less identified with my personality, rebuilding that connection so that I can show up as self in my relationships, and especially my relationship with my child. If I don't do that, it makes it impossible for my child to have a healthy attachment to me, which now has set up my child to go through life with this wounding. I mean, I can't stress enough how important this stuff is and how profound, like I said in the very beginning. So, but on the flip side, it's not all doom and gloom here. On the flip side, I want to say a couple of things. Number one, this is how it's supposed to work. Like this process of separation trauma, identification, personality creation, and then over identification with our personality. Like the reason why we know that this is a pattern is because it happens to everyone. Like this is the way the system was designed, including the system was designed to also involve mistakes from your parents and being parented by an imperfect human who isn't always in connection with self and maybe doesn't even do this work or whatever. So the more we do this work, the better it is for us and our kids. And also, it all is not lost if we don't do this work. We're just making it a little bit harder for our kids and a little bit more paramount for them to do this work if we don't do it, right? But then think about, and I'm sure that everyone listening to this podcast has had moments when they were in self. This loss of connection is not an absolute loss unless you're truly like psychotic or something like that. But like this loss of connection with self isn't 24/7, 365 for your entire life. Like there are moments for all of us when we can connect with ourselves. And if that weren't true, it wouldn't be possible for us to even get anywhere doing this work. We'll just be gone. The self is gone and we can't regain the connection. We've lost it. That's not true. And in fact, in a lot of writings that you'll read about the Enneagram, they don't say loss, they say perceived loss. Yourself is in there. Yourself is there. And you always are connected to it. You don't feel the connection necessarily. So when we do this work, the beautiful thing that happens is that we start to become aware of those real, true emotions, this sense inside of us, where that's coming from. And as soon as we have that, it's like a, you know, it's like a shortcut. It's like a shortcut when we're in a situation that's not going well, or we feel you know, crappy about something or we're struggling or in some sort of way, having this self-awareness means that I can now take a shortcut and be like, okay, well, I don't know exactly what's going on here, but I know me. And what I know is that I'm probably furious and I probably have a ton of thoughts about the fact that I'm furious. And I've probably done a ton of stuff to try to get away from the fact that I'm furious. And almost always when I look at something through that knowledge, that self knowledge, it's like, oh, yep, here it is. And now I can actually do something about it. Now I can be honest, even if I'm with my kid and I'm still furious. I can say, yeah, I'm really angry right now. And I also wish I weren't. And I wish that you couldn't tell that I was angry, but you can. I can just be me, myself with a capital S, instead of this fake BS, version of myself that I am when I'm too identified with my personality, with my parts, when my parts are running the show instead of myself running the show, to use IFS language. So when we do this work, our kids get to be parented by a conscious, awake human being, which is a magical gift. And as you go through your day, I bet that you can kind of tell when you're interacting with somebody and it's their real, true, for realsy self, and when you're interacting with somebody and you're really just interacting with all their parts, and how different that feels. And when it's somebody is important to you as your parent, it matters that our kids can sense that they are really with us. They're really with I'm with my kids. They're really with me, not 24/7. Absolutely not. I'm a human being. I get sucked into my phone or preoccupied with crap that doesn't matter or distracted and not really paying attention. Of course, that happens. And at the same time, if you look at the preponderance of my parent-child relationships with my kids, the preponderance of those relationships is a relationship between two real humans, not two bullshit parts constructions that aren't really real. And when we are doing that, we are healing so much more than just our own past. We're healing the world, in my opinion, because relationships that are real like that are the key to making the world a better place. And conversely, when we are two, activated parts conglomerations interacting with each other instead of two humans interacting with each other, we're hurting each other over and over again. My denial that I was angry while Mike kept telling me I was angry was just invalidating him and making him feel less and less safe to tell me how he felt, right? Whereas me being like, yeah, I'm really angry. And I get that it kind of sucks to be married to me when I'm like this. And this is just part of who I am. And it is what it is. Like, holy cow, like how validating to my husband, how safe he can start to feel to talk to me about how he feels being married to someone who's angry, all of these things. And I just could not do that until I did my work to raise my consciousness and regain that connection with self. So I hope I've inspired you about this stuff, and I hope it makes sense. It's really complex, and I get that. If this is all resonating with you, you might remember back in April, I did an Enneagram, like an in-person Enneagram day retreat here in Denver. Well, I'm doing another one. And hopefully, if you're on my email list, you've already heard about it many, many times, but I tell you about it again. It's in August. And it's about half full right now at the time of recording this podcast. And I would love to invite you to my home. I host this in my home, and it is absolutely a retreat setting. You get a little gift basket, some teaching materials to take home with you. We have brunch, lots of spaciousness for just reflection and going deep. Some of these concepts, it can feel like you're drinking from a fire hose. So it's a chance for you to discover your type if you don't know what it is, learn a little bit more about all of these really cool ideas that we're talking about, and start to apply them into your own work, and maybe even see a little bit of a roadmap for what that work could look like. So the link to learn more about that event and sign up will be in the show notes. And I can't wait to talk to you again next week, everybody. Bye. The episode is over, but there's more waiting for you. You can grab my free workbook, Getting Kids to Listen the First Time, that walks you through the fundamental principles I teach all of my clients and applies them to this very universal parenting challenge. So if you're sick of repeating yourself all day long or just want to learn more about my style, you'll definitely want to go to bit.ly/kidswholisten. And if you're ready to work with me, let's meet. Set up a free call at bit.ly/Kaplan call, and let's create an action plan that gets you exactly where you want to go. And of course, links to all this goodness are in the show notes. Thanks for joining, and I'll see you next time.